J.E.A has joined us on the line. Thank you very much for your time and good morning to you, sir.
Good morning to you and good morning to your listeners as well.
And I don't know why, I don't know if he feels the same. You worked with him very closely, but every memorial feels sad. I don't know when, for me personally, is ever a day is ever going to come when you remember him with a smile. Anytime you remember him, you feel sad. I don't know why. Does it feel the same for you?
No, I think that predominantly you have mixed feelings throughout the year, and especially you feel sad because death always does that to you. In most times, when I think about him, I am elated and actually quite upbeat when Professor Mills comes to my mind, or I'm thinking about him for any reason, or something happens and he comes to my mind. I don't do it with sadness. It actually comes with happiness because I think that we, those who were blessed to have actually worked quite closely with him at certain points in his life, know that he taught us a lot of lessons. And he lived his life by example. So you can't but admire or even hold in reverence the way in which this man spent the years he had with us. And his leadership skills were second to none. So, no, today definitely it's a moment of sadness. We remember his death, but mostly now, when I think of Professor Mills, for me, it's a time of elation or a moment of encouragement, actually, is the word I should say.
He led by example.
Yes.
So his actions, are you talking about his actions were an example of how he wanted you to perhaps act under him?
Well, yes. I mean, he was very principled. And once you lived within his principles, it was very easy to work with. And he just didn't want his leadership or his government to be tarnished with anything that would bring his government into disrepute. And more importantly, he just thought that as leader, he had to do things to help the people. So he was totally people-centered. He was not in the least materialistic. And quite simply, we have actually been blessed to have had somebody of such a high level of intellectual repute demonstrates to us that with everything, even humbleness is not a disease that actually ever caught. It's not an illness that ran away from him over there. He was totally, completely humble and didn't have an iota of arrogance within his system.
And that's the interesting thing about him. You said he's somebody of high level of intellectual repute, but in your engagements with him, you always realize that even when you didn't have the opportunity of meeting him, you watch him from a distance, you realize you're meeting a man, not someone who carries his achievements and accolades, and it never made him proud. But I realized this year's lecture was addressed by Madam Charlotte Osei, former chairperson of the Electoral Commission. For you personally, what was your takeaway from that lecture that she delivered?
There were so many takeaways. And even though one's attributes and good points, if I can put it that way, for Professor Mills have been done over the years, I'm amazed how we never get exhausted of the different perspectives, almost of the same thing, that people talk about, which demonstrates who this man was. And it was so refreshing because for the first time we were getting somebody who had worked with him, but as a student who then became his employee. She was his employee and he was her employer at the NCCA. And more importantly, at the point, she was his speech writer. And it was so like the man, because no matter who you were, he would listen, and then he would ponder over it, sometimes a week or two, sometimes a month. And then he would come back to the very thing that you may have thought that he had forgotten, and either strengthen his position or agree that no, you had a position which he thinks that he must listen to. And so when she rendered her explanation for me or for some of us, that was Professor Mills. He, regardless of who he was speaking to or who was talking on an issue, he listened. I also like the part where she spoke about one of our leaders from a different jurisdiction saying that, one of his, not leaders, but one of his tutors from his school days, said that he was known to be somebody who listened a lot and talked very little. And that is also the mark of an intellectual. You see, in life, the more you learn, the more you know that you do not know. And that was how Professor Mills lived his life. He always wanted to explore and get people's perspectives. Indeed, we lost an icon. And but like I said, when I think of him most of the time, I think of him as a source of inspiration, a source of joy, and he makes me believe truly that no matter all the trials and tribulations of this world, if you want to do good, you can do good regardless of what people say or not say. Your conscience is clear, and at the end of the day, posterity will judge you.
And from what I hear, you're saying that every year you learn something new about Professor Mills. You hear new stories about people who encountered him and how they feel about him. So every time you are putting together the lecture, you're looking forward to what you hear that you did not know.
Exactly. You put it in a different format, yeah. And sometimes it's the same thing, but in a different perspective. Different stories that give the same example, because they talk about his humility, they talk about his integrity, they talk about his forthrightness, they talk about his calmness, they talk about his listening skills. But from different perspectives, you hear that he was a principled person, he had a lifestyle, and he transcended everybody who he met and who he dealt with. And that for me is the true legacy of a person. And his legacy and posterity, for what anyone can say, is judging him very, very well.
Well, you did a lecture 2 days ago. Today, what is happening?
Today is the wreath laying ceremony, where we will lay wreaths at his place. It's a little service. He was a Methodist, so there will be a little service for him, and then we will lay wreaths. And I believe His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama, he will be present. He will speak. The Vice President will be present. She will read scripture, one of the verses. We hope that the Speaker of Parliament will attend, and he will lay a wreath on behalf of Parliament. And so it's a full-fledged program, but short to the point, and it's just for all of us to reflect on a man who has done so much for our country. And it is right that we actually take a time to remember him, and equally to keep ourselves in check. It's like, how do I call it? It's a reality check. So when we do this, we then realize that, look, you can really live a good life, and it matters not if people have a different view. So long as your conscience is clear and you're able to justify it in front of your board, then please feel free and go ahead. That is how the man, Professor Mills, lived his life. And we thank God, those of us that we were actually blessed to have been in his presence. And we are humble that we were able to work with him, and he chose some of us to actually work closely with him.
Will there be other events after today's own?
Yes, on Saturday we will have to, he was a lover of hockey, a sportsman. I mean, I always say to people that to become a sportsman, or Sportsman of the Year in the school that he attended, the school I attended, Achimota School. It's a big feat, and normally you get it once a year, but in his life, Professor Mills, for 2 years running, was Sportsman of the Year in Achimota School. He swam, he did athletics, he played fantastic football, and he swam. So he achieved major feats in sports. People talk of his academic prowess, but actually, he was actually very, very good. He played for Ghana, the national hockey team. So, as the John Evans Mills Memorial Heritage, as one of the main thematics we promote him with, apart from governance and academia, is sports. And so we try to hold the hockey tournament every year, bringing teams together, and they play a tournament in his name, and we give out a cup in his name. So that will be on this Saturday from 8 a.m. in the morning right up to early afternoon, or late afternoon, I should say. And that is something we've done every year.
Thank you. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you so much for having me on your program. God bless.
Well, so today is a wreath laying ceremony. Saturday, there will be the hockey match that will be held to remember him, to commemorate his passing. Well, he says he remembers Professor John Evans Mills. It's mixed feelings for him, a bit of sadness for his loss, but mostly fondly because of the lessons he left him with. He was a leader that led by example. This is Madame Charlotte Osei. Charlotte Osei was under Professor Mills in charge of the National Commission for Civic Education. She later became chairperson of the Electoral Commission. She delivered a lecture 2 days ago. Portions of that lecture. Listen.
Mills was particularly committed to mentoring young women in law, recognizing the barriers we faced and the potential it represented. Lady J.E.A. Osei and myself were two young women who probably would not have been able to obtain our Master of Laws degrees without the support of Prof. Mills. He was a constant referee on every young student applicant for graduate work. Through Prof's support, one of my classmates ended up at Prof's alma mater, the London School of Economics, for his LLM. And Prof helped him to get his first job at the Ghana Stock Exchange when he came back home. And for all the students, Prof did not have to know where we came from, who our parents were. He just helped. Prof was always accessible to his students. When I was at Queen's University in Canada, I worked in the library. And one time they were throwing away all the books where they had additional copies. So I asked them, what were they going to do with the books? They said they were going to be trashed. And I said, oh, could I have them for the law faculty? And they said, yes. So I ended up with 48 boxes of books in my apartment. Now, I didn't know how these books were going to get to Ghana. Every week, my landlord would come and look at the boxes and ask me when the boxes were moving. Eventually, I think Prof was at the IRS at the time. I managed to get a message to Prof that I was about to be kicked out of my apartment with 48 boxes of law books. Prof immediately called the High Commissioner. They sent a van and they picked these 48 boxes of books before my landlord kicked me and the books onto the streets of Kingston, Ontario. That was Prof, always accessible. Beyond all this, Prof was very committed to building the institutional capacity of the Faculty of Law. He wanted Ghanaian students to be able to compete with their counterparts anywhere in the world. But he also wanted us to understand and address the specific legal and development challenges facing Ghana. So as much as Prof would help you to get graduate admissions and go do your masters, Prof would always stay in touch and encourage you to come back home. So his appointments as visiting professor at Temple University in Philadelphia, and he was a visiting lecturer at Leiden University in the Netherlands, enriched his teaching. It also opened up opportunities for us, his students, because most of us got admission to these universities because on the strength of Prof's references. Prof was also a very kind lecturer. He was one of those lecturers who was always giving lifts to his students. There was one particular lift story that happened in my class that was very interesting. Because the three parties in this story are now a Court of Appeal judge and two very respected lawyers, I will not mention their names. So, one day, the one who is now a judge was studying at the law library. He took off his shoes while studying and he fell asleep. Another classmate, let's call him J1, goes and picks his shoes. Then he decides to leave the library and hands the shoes over to J2. It was time for a lecture. J2, rather than leaving the shoes in the library, took the shoes to the lecture room. So our current Court of Appeal judge had to walk barefoot to the lecture room. So he gets to the lecture room, livid, and sees his shoes with J2. And asked J2 how he got his shoes. J2 said, hey, non est factum, not my deed. It was J1 who gave me the shoes. At this time, J1 is sitting in a corner of the lecture room. He knows he's in trouble. And the victim is making signals to show him that he'll get a good beating after class. So class ends, and victim goes to hide by the School of Communication Studies. There were some bushes there, waiting for J1 to come and receive the beating of his life. This would probably have ended up with at least two of them expelled from the law faculty. So J1 is hiding at the law faculty, unable to go back to the hostel. And then luckily for him, Prof used to come evenings to check his mailbox on his way home. Prof comes, law faculty is dark, and Prof is like, what are you doing here? He mumbles something. Prof said, no, you get into my car. So he gets into Prof's car. They drive past the victim still standing in the bushes, and he waves at him, waiting to beat him up. And Prof takes him straight to his hostel, which was out of Prof's way, and then Prof drives off to Legon Hills. And so every time we talk about this, I tell them, certainly one of you would not be a lawyer today and one would not be a judge, because you would have all been sent home. But that was the measure of Prof, and that was the kind of relationship Prof had with his students. Reputation built in silence lasts longer than applause. For Prof, the classroom was more than a venue for transmitting information. It was a sacred space where minds were opened, characters were formed, and futures were shaped. Students who attended his law classes remember a professor who demanded excellence, but provided the support necessary to achieve it. He had very high expectations, and his marks were usually very low. But he also had high investments in our success. Mills understood that teaching law was not just about imparting legal knowledge. It was about developing legal minds. He taught his students not just what to think, but how to think. He emphasized critical analysis, logical reasoning, and ethical reflection. He wanted his students to understand not just the letter of the law, but its spirit and its purpose. He saw law as a tool for addressing social justice, or for enabling social justice and national development. He did not see legal education as merely professional training, but as preparation for service to society. Hence his earlier admonition about not being the cause of anyone losing their job. He also emphasized the importance of integrity in legal practice. He understood that as lawyers, we would face situations where we could choose between personal gain and professional ethics. Through his teaching and personal example, he sought to instill in his students the moral foundation necessary to make the choice. And this teaching went beyond the classroom to his approach to everything. Honorable Nana Oye and her friends were living on campus, and Mills was teaching at the law school. His lectures were at 7 a.m. in the morning because he had to lecture before going to the IRS. And he started giving a group of them lifts to Makola. So when there were 2, it was fine. But as word spread, they became 3, and then 4, and then 5. So now, Prof decided that when he gets there, he's not going to decide who gets into his car. The first ones to arrive gets the lift. And that was Prof. Always fair, even in the little decisions.